Hello and welcome to this health and safety module presentation, which is part of the SCSI PSRA CPD program 2022. I'm Sam from the RICS Building Standards team, and I'm here to talk about surveying safely. This is an RICS guidance note that is applicable to all property professionals. So firstly, I'm going to define and clarify, well, what is surveying safely, or what it is. So it's a guidance note, which means that it's a document that provides users with recommendations or an approach for accepted good practice as followed by competent and conscientious practitioners. So none of this is prescriptive. None of this is you must do all of this. This is just everyone's job is different, so pick and choose what's appropriate and what's relevant to you, and hopefully everyone can be kept safe. So I've made some assumptions when making this content, just because I don't know everyone who's going to be watching this. So I'm assuming that most people are employed, and therefore your companies will have existing health and safety policies and procedures that you'll follow. So my first bit of advice is read them, make yourself aware of everything that your company has, and then follow it, obviously. So this CPD isn't reinventing the wheel or anything. And if you're self-employed, then therefore you're responsible for that kind of stuff anyway. So I advise reading the first couple of bits of the Surveying Safely guide, because that'll cover your corporate responsibilities. And I'll give an overview of that in this presentation. And obviously, companies just want to keep their employees safe, so that's the point of all that. This CPD today, I'll focus on the day job of surveying. I'll give an overview of, this is all the stuff that's in the guide, just to make you aware as an overview. But then I'll cover visiting premises and sites as the main section and give you some practical examples to go away and think about and apply, and how you can apply them to your job. And I've got Michelle here from the SCSI listening. So Michelle, your personal mission today is just to stay awake through all this. I promise that I've got some valuable personal experience and lessons to share, but they're buried deep in the middle of this presentation after like a million bullet points. So by the end of this, you might want to join us and be one of us in the surveying profession and property profession. So I'll go on to the next slide, and I'll just turn my mug off so then you don't get distracted. Right, so topics I'm going to cover today in Surveying Safely. This is all about, the first bit of the guidance note covers personal responsibilities for property professionals and corporate responsibilities. The firm's trying to keep you safe. So these are just a quick overview, so I won't stay too long on these slides. So this shows is simply the headings and the subheadings, and we won't get bogged down in the detail because you can go and read the guidance note afterwards. So the first section of the guidance note covers influencing factors, personal responsibilities, the safe person concept, and corporate responsibilities. And you can have all this in place, or your company can have all this in place, but you also need to know what happens if it all goes wrong. So what are those emergency procedures that you need to follow? Hopefully your companies have got all these in place as employees of companies. So go and read all of that. The next section of the guidance note covers how to assess hazards and risks. I'm not going to cover this in this presentation because I'm just going to give some practical examples of how to apply to your job, keeping you safe on site. But if you want to know more, you can read these sections in the guidance note. So that's risk management, the concept of managing risk, working safely as a property firm or a property professional, assessing risk. I am actually going to cover this next session, hierarchy of risk control, just so you're aware and you can apply it to your dynamic risk assessments when you're on site, because it kind of goes hand in hand. And then the last section here is evaluating risk. So go ahead and read them if you're the one carrying out the risk assessments in the guidance note. The next section of surveying safely covers like places of work, like where are you actually working, whether this is on site or whether that's in an office. Obviously, all these different places of work have different risks that you need to consider. And the sections covered here: perception and behaviours, geographical location, historical use, immediate locality, the risks identified and how they're managed, common requirements of places of work, emergency arrangements, building services, maintenance of buildings, and fixed equipment. All of these have separate detailed sections within the guidance note. And some of these will apply to you, some of them won't. So just go ahead and read the bits that apply to you. And continuing the overview of the guidance note, it moves on to the occupational hygiene and health and safety issues that could be encountered. The big thing for me when I was surveying before I joined RICS was mainly the asbestos side of things and sun protection, you know, when you're working outside and everything. But some of these, depending if you're working in residential, commercial, industrial, maybe with disused buildings, they all have different requirements to keep you safe. So read up on this in the guidance note. And then, as you can see here, the main thing I'm going to cover today is the visiting of premises and sites, which this is quite a large section. But everybody needs to be aware of fire safety. Depending on what kind of building it is, will have different requirements. If you're surveying residential property, the guidance note, it effectively links you to another couple of guidance notes that you can read. Like quite a few surveys are done for valuation purposes, so it links you to the valuation guidance that RICS can offer. And if you're managing property, you've got additional duties. So there's another guidance note there that it references. And then if you're actually working in construction or managing construction work, you've obviously got all the construction regulations. So whatever's applicable to your area of work, focus on those areas to make sure that you're safe doing the job that you're doing. So that completes the general overview of that's everything included in surveying safely, the guidance note. So I'll just move on to this hierarchy of risk control, because this is really important to just how you keep yourself safe. So this brief overview of risk control. So I'm not here to tell you how to do a risk assessment, and I'm not here to tell you how to do your job. So this is just bits for you to consider. I'm here to hopefully remind you, because hopefully you've had adequate training to do your job, and your companies have got good procedures in place to allow you to do your job. So this is just to get you thinking about why do we do it. Now I don't want to get caught up in like where this is sourced from. Obviously this is from the UK government HSE, which is obviously different to the Republic of Ireland HSE, but these are broad principles of health and safety which can be adopted globally. Now, I don't know about you, but I see people dressed up in PPE, and like the classic example is a politician who's kitted out in everything that you can think of just to do an interview. And as you can see, PPE is actually last on the list of things in the hierarchy. It's number 5. So risks should be reduced to the lowest reasonable, practicable level by taking preventative measures in order of priority. And as you can see, in order to reduce or eliminate a risk, you need to consider all these different points. So you don't just simply jump to the easiest thing to implement, you need to follow it in sequential order 1 to 5. So these politicians shouldn't be standing in a dangerous place to do an interview where they need all this PPE, because that's if there's a risk of, say, like something falling on your head that you need a hard hat, or there's vehicles driving around so you need a high-vis jacket or a high-vis vest, then surely the answer is move and find a more appropriate location to do the task, like the interview. So like number 1 here is elimination of the risk. So just as a quick overview, we've got elimination, which is redesign the activity or substitute a substance so that the hazard is removed or eliminated. So the example could be avoid working at height, could be an example. So use a drone to do a roof survey instead. Number 2, substitution. Replace the materials used or the proposed work with one that's less hazardous. You obviously just need to make sure that the alternative is safer than the original. But yeah, substitute the situation. Number 3, engineering controls. Now this is use work equipment or other measures to prevent, let's say, falls where there cannot be, where you cannot avoid working from height. So like use an additional or different piece of machinery to do a job. Like this is a local, an example will be like local extraction of exhaust fumes when cutting, say where there's a risk of dust or fumes. So it's separating the hazard from the operatives by a method that's enclosing or guarding the dangerous item. So, and this protects the majority of people, not just the individual doing the job. So that's the engineering controls. Number 4, administrative controls. These are all about identifying and implementing the procedures needed to work safely. So for example, reducing the need for lone working or ensuring that work is completed in daylight hours. So like don't do surveys at night. Is like an obvious way to keep yourself safe. Reduce the time that you're exposed to a risk. So don't do too much work in a day. If you're doing loads of work, you'll get tired and there's more risk of there being an issue. And like don't use mobile phones in hazardous areas. There can be rules that can be put in place to ensure that administrative rules and controls that can be put in place to keep you safe. And then if all of those can't reduce or eliminate the risk, then you move to PPE, the personal protective equipment or clothes. So only after all the other previous measures have been tried and found ineffective in controlling the risk to a reasonably practical level, must PPE be used. So that's why I said, the politicians should move to a different location to do their interview. So right, as long as you understand this hierarchy of risk, you can then actively manage risks when you're on site. Now, this is still an overview of what's included in the surveying bit, but this is obviously the main bit I'm going to talk about, the visiting sites and premises. So these are an overview of just what's in this section, which is quite a big section still, and health and safety is a massive area, so not surprised that this is quite big. So I'll just do a quick overview of this and then I'll get into the detail. So yeah, these are the points in the before visiting site. There's a checklist. So being a guidance note for surveyors, there's obviously a massive focus on buildings and their hazards. But in my opinion, the most dangerous thing that you can encounter is people and animals. So totally different from buildings is what are the people in the buildings. And when I say animals, the main thing is dogs. People have dogs, which are obviously a risk. But I'll obviously cover that in a bit more detail when talking about how what you should look out for when you're on the survey. But that's so much more important, in my opinion, than say structural stability. It's just a minor thing, structural instability or stability when there's people around. But yeah, so I'll break this up into 3 different parts. So you've got the before visiting site checklist. Just as an overview, these are the subheadings: traveling to and from site, lone working, condition of the property, occupation, that's the people or how it's being used, the activity on the site, are there any site rules or welfare issues or facilities, roofs and high structures, dangerous substances, diseases, special access arrangements, special risks, access equipment, other equipment, environmental matters and personal matters. I'll go through all of these in more detail. This is just an overview. The next section is arriving and during the site visit. Now this is where I can give some practical examples, so you just need to stay focused until I can get to my personal experiences. I told you there was going to be loads of bullet points here, but we've got so when you're on site, first of all, I'm going to cover arriving on site, where to park people, where do you put people, where do you put dogs. Then we'll move on to like the structural stability issues, any issues with timber, glass or sharp objects, roofs, unsafe atmospheres, danger from live and insecure services, radio frequency hazards, slips and trip hazards, falls from height, hidden traps and ducts and openings, impact of other other people or animals at the property, contamination, rural environments, adverse weather conditions, and vermin and birds. You just need to think this guidance note covers a lot of areas. So what is applicable to your job, and then look at those areas. And then we'll wrap up with securing the site and leaving. Right, so this bit is the first section, before visiting a site or premises. Now, I don't know the nature of everyone who's going to listen to this, so I've covered quite a broad scope. And some of you listening may be like, oh, I'm a commercial agent, so you wear a suit, you meet clients in nice offices, so you might not need to know about the roof inspections because you don't do them. Or you could be a different kind of property professional where you go out there, you get dirty, you crawl on your hands and knees, but maybe you don't do anything at high level. You could have standard terms of engagement that say high level surveys are excluded. Everything's done at ground level. You use binoculars or you use a drone, so that might not be applicable to you. But just where maybe one person who listens who needs to know about that, I'll just mention stuff anyway. So firstly, as I've already said, and I posed the question before, you need to know, what does your company have? So what are your company's usual policies and procedures? Start there, fill in the gaps of what information that you need to check before visiting sites, because this is generic. You need to know, what does your company have, and follow those notes, because that's about keeping you safe, and your company knows exactly what you're doing, and then we'll know how best to keep you safe. So we'll start off with the checklist here is traveling to and from site. Are you working in a city, or is it more rural? So what's easier or safer to use, public transport, or do you use your own transport? Like, has the journey been planned to avoid driving too fast or too long, or when tired? Like, are you visiting multiple sites, or are you just doing one site a day? I've previously worked where I had to get to sites for 4 o'clock in the morning, because the sites were only open between the morning, and then everyone was gone by lunchtime, because they were out doing their job, doing the deliveries and everything. So I had to get to the buildings early hours, so I had to plan that accordingly. I had to obviously get an early night, make sure that I didn't fall asleep at the wheel the next day. Lone working, does your firm have any specific requirements or procedures for lone working, like whether that's in an office, working from home, or going to other buildings or on construction sites? Like, what is that procedure, and follow that. How does your company keep you safe? Does the company have a record of like all the employees' mobile numbers, and does someone have a procedure to follow in the office to make sure that if you don't call, they call you? And also, tied in with the traveling to site, do you know if you're going to have signal when you're on site? Is that something that you can find out? Yes, it's something that you can find out before you go to site, because the mobile phone operators have websites where you can punch in the postcode and it tells you, do they service that area? So find out, if you go into rural areas, will you have phone reception when you get there? You need to have those regular check-in calls. Find out what your company policy is for when you should call in or message in. And then, like, worst case scenario, what happens if something goes wrong? Your company should then also have a rescue plan. Like, what happens if you phone in to say, oh, I've fallen, I've broken my leg? What is that plan? Particularly when you're lone working, that's so important. The next point, condition of the property. Are the premises known to be derelict or in poor condition, like obviously you should know this before you go to site, because the person instructing you will hopefully tell you this and provide you with some information. So then what is the extent or nature of the damage? Are there any areas which are defined as unsafe for access? And what security measures are in place, and like how do you gain access? Has the site been secured and locked off? So how you need to know this information before you go, so then you can arrange this access. And then obviously following the hierarchy of risks, you then know, well, can the risk be eliminated? Can they be substituted? And then working all the way down to, well, what PPE do you need if you know that this building is dangerous and that you can't eliminate the risks? Occupation. Are the premises or sites occupied? And if so, do the occupants know that a visit is being made? Like, is this being arranged by an agent, or are you dealing with the people on site? So you don't want to be turning up and then the people on site not knowing. And then what do any safeguarding issues need to be considered? Depending on the nature of the site, like, are you inspecting a school or a place where there's vulnerable people? So it's not about it could be about keeping you safe, depending on what the nature is, or it could be about keeping the occupants safe as well for your surveying activities. So yeah, who is likely to be encountered in the premises? Is this members of the public, children? If it's an abandoned building, are there squatters? Are there trespassers? Could there be animals and vermin? And then depending on what that is, potentially you may have to deal or may have to plan for occupants which may be aggressive or threatening, which I'll cover that in the experience section after this overview. Activities, so it's like, is the premises or site occupied, and then what's the nature of the occupation? So is it a residential building, retail, offices? Is it a transport hub with lots of vehicles? Is it manufacturing, warehousing, agricultural, maybe a construction site? All of these different types of activities have different requirements for health and safety. Some have procedures that you need to follow, like site rules on a construction site, whereas some sites there may not be anybody there, and you as the property professional need to manage the health and safety of your activities. So you need to know what activity that is being taken place on site. And similar to that, site rules and welfare, the next thing, does the occupier have any site rules? What are the emergency requirements? And do you need a permit to work to even enter the premises or to do your survey? Hopefully you have all this information up front provided by the client, because if there's a site induction, and that site induction could be a 2-hour site induction before you're even allowed to start work, you obviously need to have taken that into account when quoting to make sure that you've got enough time allowed for in the fee. But then it's not just about the fee and making money. This is all about, you don't want to be rushing around doing your survey because you didn't take into account that there'd be a long site induction. So it's all about keeping you safe. Everything's interlinked. And then what other facilities are on site, like toilet, wash hand, first aid facilities. Some sites have their water turned off if they're derelict. So what impact does that have on you doing the survey? If you're only there for 5 minutes to check it, it might not be an issue. But if you're there all day and there's no toilet or wash facilities, how does that impact on the survey? Roofs. So is it necessary to go on the roof or inspect the roof, or can this be done from elsewhere, whether it's ground level, a neighbouring building, on CCTV or a drone survey? You can find out all this information beforehand in the checklist. Same with high structures. Is there any other high structure? Is there a scaffold present? Is there a competent person who can sign off that scaffold? Like if you need to use it, or are you arranging for other access, like a mobile elevated working platform? And if you are you trained to use that, or is there going to be a trained operative there to assist you doing it? All these things need thinking of before going to site. Are there any dangerous substances likely to be on site, such as chemicals, radiation, asbestos? gas or other noxious atmospheric gases. And then what are the safety precautions that need to be considered before doing that? Most people don't get involved with that because it's very specialist work, like working in a confined space this is. So if you know that that is part of your job, find out what training you need to undertake that job. Some clients have all this information available, but like before visiting site in an organized way. Like they may have a database that you can have access to and download the information that you need. Some clients won't have a clue of all this information. They won't know their own duties, and you need to be the property professional informing them what their duties are to then keep you safe. So they are then responsible to provide you with the information, but you need to tell them what information you need to do your job. As an example, when I was in private practice, I spent a few days driving around North and Mid Wales installing radon detectors in various different buildings owned by a national client. I'd never been to any of these sites before, but luckily the client, being a larger client, it had the facilities of this property database, so I could access all the information I needed before going to site. So I had floor plans that I could check. I could identify the rooms. I could then work out how many radon detectors I needed before going. And they had asbestos registers, so I could check, was there any areas which were off limits, that are restricted areas? Because there's no point going to site without being able to access the areas that you need to go to. But if those areas have a health and safety implication, you need to then work through that hierarchy, the risk hierarchy, to work out, well, how do you do your job, or can the job even be done safely? But all this information provided by clients, don't rely on 100%, because some of it could be out of date, some of it could just be plain wrong. Even with like the asbestos registers, I checked the asbestos registers in that example I gave. I installed detectors in a plant room. As you're probably well aware, plant rooms are usually high risk areas. They're areas that are most likely to have asbestos containing materials in from a commercial industrial building. And the asbestos register said there was nothing in there. But obviously when I installed the radon detectors, that's not, that work doesn't involve disturbing a lot of the site, or I'm not drilling into any surfaces, I'm not removing anything. So I wasn't at a high risk installing that in there. But then the very next year, we did a general maintenance scheme on the site, and it turned out that there was asbestos debris within the plant room, and that wasn't even on the register. So never take anything as 100% accurate. You've always got to use your professional knowledge and skills to identify, is this a risk? And these are all dynamic risk assessments. As you're doing the job, you're constantly assessing risk. So with that, I've got here, without doing these checks, it may not be possible to visit some parts of the premises, and you may need to abandon the visit altogether and arrange another visit if you don't do these checks before you go and plan it into your survey. I'll move on to the next slide now, as this is just this is now moving on to the arriving and during visits. So arriving and during visits to premises or at site. So first, when you're arriving, have you got a designated check-in and check-out procedure? We've talked about that in the pre-planning stuff. So make sure that you follow that. I would say always park your car. So this is now practical examples for one, like when you're arriving on site. So I'd say when you're parking your car, always try and leave your car where you can drive forward out of the parking space. So like, don't face a dead end when you arrive. Try and reverse into parking bays and things, because as I'll cover with people, there may be times where you need to leave site quite quickly. So always make sure that's in your control. Focus on everything that you can be in control of. So yeah, if you need to make a quick getaway, you've got your car parked facing in the direction that you need to travel. And then as a bit of a personal experience, you need to learn how to lock your car and keep your keys with you at all times. As an example, my car key fob has 3 buttons. It's got a lock button, an unlock button, and a boot only button. And that boot only button is really handy because you can obviously unlock the boot, get your equipment out, but not unlock all the other doors. So it's like if you've got your head in the boot trying to get some equipment out, no one can then just get in the driver's door and then do anything because it's only the one door that's unlocked. But learn how to use that. When I first got my car, I went to do a survey, and I typically leave my ladders in the car until I know that I need them because, you know, they're heavy. I don't want to be carrying them around. Carrying around heavy stuff is another risk that you need to consider to yourself. So I went into this house. I realized that I needed the ladders. I went back out to the car, unlocked the car just with the boot button to unlock the boot only. I got the ladders out, I closed the boot, and I cracked on with the survey. Everything went well. I then finished the survey, went back to the car at the end of it, went to put all my stuff away, and then I couldn't get in the car. And I was like, oh, where are the keys? I've left them in the boot. My car, it automatically you unlock it with the boot button. As soon as you close the boot, it automatically locks it, which it sounds like that's a really good security feature. So you don't end up leaving anything unlocked. But it also, if you leave the keys in the car, then you've just locked yourself out the car, and it was an absolute nightmare, and I felt like a right lemon. But the moral of the story is learn how to use your own equipment so you don't make stupid mistakes, which that can have, like, if that was in a rural location, that could have had a massive issue with me, like, how do I get home? Luckily, this was in near a city centre, so it wasn't that big of a deal. I could actually get home, get my spare key, unlock. My wife then gave me a lift back. I could unlock the car and I could drive home. But I did have, there was a bit of an issue basically that day, so learn from my mistakes. But now, once you've arrived, just parked your car, once you've arrived, what happens if you're meeting a person in the building? So this is covered in the guidance note, but not in a great amount of detail. And in my opinion, it's the biggest risk because of how little control you have to manage a people-related risk situation. Compare this to like building risk, where you're a property professional, you can look at a building and see that risk and you can decide not to go in that building. So the unpredictable nature of people is what I find the biggest risk. You've usually got time to assess a building risk, whereas a person, if someone's being aggressive, it can escalate really quickly, and that's then totally out of your control. So other people are the biggest risks, and dogs and everything, which will come on to dogs. And in particular, out of the two, men are more of a risk than women. And particularly if there's a lone man that you're meeting there, there's more risk for a woman if going to meet a lone man. That's like statistical fact. So try and get that information before you go to site, like who are you meeting, and then take those precautions. So always be wary when meeting someone who you don't know for the first time. Trust your gut feeling if there's something that doesn't feel right, or if you don't feel safe. But you usually get like a good sense of somebody pretty quickly. This is a big if you're focused on them. So when you arrive, don't spend time like looking at your phone or looking at your tablet, getting ready for the survey. You need to be like focused on that person who you don't know and get a good sense of them and be aware of them. Now, body language and posture, this is what you need to use for to your advantage. So I'll use an example of a residential survey. If you're going to someone else's territory, into someone else's house, you're meeting like the owner, the vendor, who's selling. This is their space, this is their territory, and it can be deeply personal to them. So as this is their home, so you don't be rude, you treat them with respect. You put some overshoes on, so you're not taking your shoes off. So that's a physical action that's demonstrating that you're treating them and their property with respect. However, you need to act like you're in charge, even though this is their house. So it's like you are the professional in this situation. You're here to do a job. And if you're here to do a job and you're acting professionally, that puts you in a position of authority. And you need to use that authority to make sure that you stay safe. So as an example, don't be afraid of saying, don't lock the door, please. Or always remember your manners saying please, but yeah, tell them not to lock the door, because as an example, you need to be testing the doors, make sure that they work, but also you don't want to be locked in a building. So you need to use your body language, your posture, and be straightforward and direct, but polite in all of your language. And if they're not a horrible person, like, they'll be totally okay with this. You introduce yourself, you're being professional, you're giving them a very simple instruction: don't lock the door, please. But obviously, if you get a sense that they're confrontational, that's a big red flag from the start. So I mean, I would just leave. So if you feel there's a chance that this could escalate, just leave. And remember, don't think that you have to get the job done. If you get a sense of somebody who, like, maybe this is going to be confrontational, you want to avoid escalation, and you should leave. And whether you return with a different strategy, a two-person operation as opposed to a single person, you need to do a job safely or don't do it, basically. The next thing is just general health and safety. Follow your company's COVID procedures and policies. Policies change, and I don't want to be like too prescriptive, but the standard thing is obviously keep your distance. Ask if people are fit and well before you go. Ask if they're fit and well when you arrive. Does your company tell you to wear a mask? Do you need to ask the vendor if they'll wear a mask while you're in the building? But follow whatever your latest company policy is, or government policy, potentially, at the time of you're listening to this. Right, so next, you've introduced yourself. Now you're inside the building. Firstly, like the RICS guidance note has the people a bit further down on the list, but I'm going to say ask straight away, are there any other people in the building? Because you need to know where they are. Ask who's there and where they are. And if they question, like, why do you need to know that information? Just say something like, oh, well, I don't want to walk in on anyone getting dressed or sleeping or doing anything private. And people should be okay with that. And then I usually ask people to, can they wait in the living room? So it's about asking them to be in a place where you know where they are. So then you're aware when you're doing the survey of where they are, instead of them following you around. The next thing is to ask, like, are there any dogs? Because dogs are a pretty big risk. And ask if the dog can be put in the kitchen is a good strategy, which I've used, because basically kitchens are the biggest risk room. Without sounding too scary, kitchens are places where people store their knives. And the whole point of this is to minimize risk. And you can minimize risk in a good way by putting all the dangerous things in one room, which you don't go into until it's like planned. So you can do the rest of the survey, and then at the end you can then go into the kitchen, ask the dog to be moved into the living room, and then you know that the owner and the dog is in the living room, and you can do the kitchen, which is a risk area, without minimizing the risk by knowing that other things or people or animals have been moved. And also, as just like a site layout arrangement, they're usually away from the exit. So if you need to leave suddenly, you can do. You typically enter at the front of the house and the kitchen's at the back. Every property is different. That's just a general rule. But it means that if the dog or you basically don't want a dog or a person in between you and an exit. So you can make an exit if you need to. Bags and equipment. This all depends on what kind of job you're doing at the property. It's like, do you have a bag? Your kit bag may contain like lethal weapons. I know mine has hammers in, bolsters, crowbars, screwdrivers. So you want to know where your kit bag is and don't leave it accessible to somebody who you don't know. And aside from equipment bags, some people carry around handbags for like personal things. I advise that handbags are dangerous. The straps on handbags can be used to strangle people. And that's come from speaking to an ex-police officer. So yeah, don't carry a handbag, just carry what you need to carry to do the job and nothing else. Now, most surveyors, don't like being followed around when doing a survey. So, like I've already said, ask the people to remain in the sitting room while you're doing the survey. If someone offers you a drink, I usually say no. I carry a bottle of water around with me, so that means that I'm like self-sufficient when doing the survey. And then just be aware of inner room situations. As an example, utilities off of kitchens usually don't have an independent exit. You can find this out by reviewing the floor plans beforehand. But yeah, if you get to site, knowing that you've asked the people to be in the living room, when you go into the kitchen, the risk room, and then you go into a utility where there's no other exit apart from the kitchen, at least you know where the people are, that they're not going to be between you and an exit when you need to get back into the kitchen. So yeah, that's the bit which I find as the biggest risk. But I think now I'll move on to the actual bit that's in the RICS note. But I'll just end this section of me talking with if you get a bad feeling about somebody, just leave. That's the main thing. So moving on to the specifics of surveying and structures, this basically follows the same checklist of what you do before going to site. But obviously this is now on site. So consider each situation as it comes, and consider the use of dynamic risk assessments, which I mentioned before, assessing a risk as and when it crops up in case the situation changes. So the first point here is structural stability. As the property professional, you're assessing the structure. Some property professionals assess the structure. So if you see structural elements which there's a chance of partial or total collapse, such as chimneys or gable walls or parapets, we've had quite a lot of storms recently, you need to use your professional experience to assess them and make a judgment there and then on site as to how close you get to those subjects or whether you enter the building or not. And this can also include like you're looking out for bulging on walls or unrestrained walls. Damp can lead to rotten or corroded beams or columns in floors or walls, or in roof structures, or if you're looking at metalwork, there could be corrosion of metalwork. So visually assess items before you use them or put any weight on them. Looking at timber and glass and sharp objects, there's the chance of rotten or broken floorboards or staircases. You're looking for signs of decay or weakening due to age, damp or insect attack, any projecting nails or screws. Now that's not just old properties. This could be in brand new build properties where there's nails sticking out of joinery that haven't been hammered down or installed correctly. There could be broken glass in older properties which isn't safety glass. Older windows, sash windows, there could be issues with the sash cords which are weak or broken. So when trying to operate them, do that safely. Don't get too close. Don't apply weight where there's a chance of you being pulled towards the window or damaging it. If stuff doesn't move, don't force it because you don't want to cause any sudden movements with damaged sash windows. In roofs, typically some companies have policies where you don't enter a roof space, you just look from the loft hatch. But it all depends on what you're trained for and what you've said that you're going to do. Hazards are likely to be, you could have, like if it's an industrial building, you could have fragile asbestos cement covering, so obviously you're not going on those roofs. There could be fragile elements such as roof lights or just the roof structure in general. There could be unprotected openings or low-level parapets to consider. This is all stuff where, depending on the type of building that you're looking at, you may come across this, you may not. So you need to know what you've quoted for and then know how to keep yourself safe when you're doing these inspections. If you can avoid going on roofs, that's the better option. But if you are looking at a larger roof, make sure that you understand where you can walk whether it's got a man-safe system or any other form of fall arrest system, and use them correctly if you're trained to use them at all. You could be exposed to unsafe atmospheres, which is quite a specialist area. So if you are doing this, that requires specific training, because there may be, in these confined spaces, there may be insufficient oxygen in there. There may be dust. There may be other kinds of fumes, or like poisonous or flammable gases. So I'd say unsafe atmospheres is something where you require specialist training to do, or whether that element is part of what you do at all. It may be totally excluded from your services. Joinery, I'd always say when you're like testing doors, always test doors from the outside. Like, never close a door when you're inside a room. There's a similar situation to my car situation, which I already talked about. There are, and linking this back to unsafe atmospheres or unsafe areas, I once got trapped. This is quite stupid. I once got trapped in a conservatory on a hot day, and to make it worse, it was also with two other people, the vendors. So the three of us were stuck in this hot room. Basically, the patio doors had some handles on the inside, which then weren't connected to the spindle or the operating mechanism. So I closed the door, and then I couldn't open the door. And to make matters worse, there wasn't a key in the conservatory to use the external door of the conservatory. So yeah, never test doors whilst you're inside a room. Always test them from the outside. Luckily in that situation, the vendors had a telephone number of a neighbour, and luckily that neighbour was in and could let us out. So please learn from my mistakes. That was like 5 years ago. I could have been trapped in there. But anyway, dangers from live or unsecured services. Again, as a property professional, you may not be a qualified electrician or a gas safe engineer or anything like that, but you need to know the signs of, well, what is dangerous electrics or gas or water supplies. If you're doing industrial sites, are there high voltage rooms, substations, or fuel store areas? If you're in rural locations that are off the main grid, what do those oil tanks look like? What looks like an unsafe environment? Find out what they are and be aware, so then you're aware for your specific area of practice. It then moves on to radio frequency. So like, do you know if there's any microwave dishes nearby, mobile phone transmission masts on top of, like if you're doing city centre work and some office buildings on the roof, you've got the mobile phone transmission masts. What are the dangers associated with them? How close should you get? So just be aware of what is applicable to your type of area of practice. Slips and trip hazards. Be careful of slippery surfaces, overgrown vegetation, changes in level. Obviously, this covers this moves into, well, what are you doing the survey for, whether it's maintenance or whether you're assessing this for public use. So you could be looking at it in different ways to advise in your service. But be aware of, when you're on site, you've also got to consider these there and then in your dynamic risk assessments. Falls from height. This could include using ladders or step-ups, working near unprotected areas. If you're using a mobile elevated working platform or scaffold or access towers, or if you're working near an excavation, how close should you get to an edge of a roof or an excavation? You need to know that to then keep yourself safe. Hidden traps and ducts and openings. My APC project to become a chartered surveyor with RSCS included a lift project. So I had to know, like, when I'm surveying the lift shaft, well, how close can I get? That's an unprotected fall. If you've got the lift doors open and the lift isn't there, and you're looking into the lift shaft. So be aware of, if you're working on lifts or lift shafts, stairwells or unguarded openings anywhere. Outside there could be guardrails, but are those guardrails corroded? Are they missing? Are they damaged? Manholes, are the manholes secure? Are they suitable for the area being looked at, whether it's an industrial car park or a pedestrianised area? Are you looking at cesspits or wells or septic tanks? So just be aware of where the surfaces are. Are there any ducts or openings? And assess these like in good light, and understand how close you can get to these things, or how do you survey them safely. And I've already talked about the impact of other people or animals. So just as a brief recap, you've got what the physical dangers of like potentially squatters or trespassers or dogs on site. Disease risk from discarded syringes, potentially if there's a building being used for has been derelict and people have been living there. Have the structures been weakened by vandalism or arson? If a building's not been occupied, or are there going to be aggressive tenants or property owners if people don't like why you're there to do your job? So just consider all the worst case situations. Contamination, this comes like as part of your assessment beforehand, so make sure that you get is the asbestos register up to date and current? Are there any other substances like lead or chemicals being stored? Those risk rooms, can you go in them? Should you go in them? You should be asking these questions as part of your risk assessments. Are there any contaminated water supplies or contaminated air conditioning systems with Legionella bacteria? Are you testing them, or is that outside of your professional competence? Rural areas is quite a specialist area because they're obviously away from other areas where you could get help, so you need to be a bit more self-sufficient. So are there hazardous operations going on in the area, such as tree felling or tractors at work? Are there farm animals that you need to be aware of? What the procedures to work around them, or chemicals being stored, or just unstable ground, waterlogging or flooding. Adverse weather conditions you need to be aware of. Plan this for your trip there, the survey there, and getting home. In my example with where I was doing a job in Wales, I had all 4 seasons in one day driving over Snowdonia. Luckily, I didn't need to take that into account when doing the surveys because they were all in lower areas. But is there going to be heavy rain, snow, extreme cold or wind or heat? Then this isn't just outside, this could be inside. If you're doing, say, fire integrity work and going through a roof space where you're checking compartmentation, loft voids get very, very hot when it's sunny outside. So know what the weather conditions are like to then know how to plan to do your job, and then how do you manage that when you're on site. And then lastly, you've got vermin and birds. Review the site and the premises for hazards such as rats or mice. You've got Viles disease to be aware of. Bird droppings have other diseases. They're lice or fleas to be aware of if there's other animals. So this can be quite a nasty subject. Obviously, you prepare for this before you go to site to be aware of any risks. And if you aren't aware of them, should you be entering that site once you get there? Is that a job of just turning around and going home until you're more prepared? And then finally, leaving site. After completing the visit of the site or premises, you need to leave it secure and tell any occupier or manager who's present in the building that you are leaving. Make sure that everybody knows that you have left, and then make sure that your company knows that you've left and communicate that. So it's like, what is that policy? I've said it from the start. Find out what your company policies are for communication before you go to site, at site, and then leaving site. And you may even apply this to your personal life as well. Like when I was self-employed, my policy was I needed to let my wife know where I was at all times. So this you can take these policies and turn them into personal stuff as well. Just being in touch with whoever needs to know where you are and when you're leaving. And then to review on completion of the visit. So on completion of the site visit, it's worth considering, are there any lessons to be learned from how you've carried out this survey, and whether any changes need to be made to any individual or organisational procedures? Are there any hazards on the premises or site that need to be notified to whoever the responsible person is, whether it's a manager or an owner, a managing agent or anything like that? And then advise what remedial action needs to be taken. And then, did any accidents happen when you were on site? Any incidents or any near miss occurrences that need to be entered into any accident books to notify whether it's the occupier or the manager of the property or your company, and how those procedures can be improved. And then this is the second to last slide. So there's loads of technology out there to keep you safe. And as when I was in practice, like I said, I just sent a Teams message to my office manager to let her know that I'd finished. I sent a WhatsApp message to my missus to let her know that I'd finished and that I was on my way home. But to emphasize the seriousness that this has on our industry, there's apps out there which are specifically targeted at the property industry. Like this is just one example, just picked it up off Google. This app, the People Safe app, I've not used this, I've got no connection to it, I've literally just taken a screenshot. They've even got a photo of an estate agent on their website because they believe that the property sector is like a high-risk lone working industry. So yeah, the main thing is make sure people know where you are when you're carrying out your job, and stay in communication with people. Communication is key to making sure people know that you're safe, and make sure if people don't hear from you, how is that situation going to be managed? So thank you very much for listening to me. Hopefully this has been helpful. And if you want any more information, the RICS Surveying Safely guidance note will be included in your pack to download from the website, but it's freely available on the internet. So hopefully you get a hold of that in your pack. But if you can't find it, just Google RICS Surveying Safely. Thank you very much.